So I'd like to now invite our panelists really to join us on the stage. I'm going to give very brief introductions. Again, I will refer you to the app to see the full bios. But if Claudia looks, Honorary Professor at Humboldt University and former IFLA President, Hayford Siaw, Chief Executive at the Ghana Library Authority, Rachel Esson, National Librarian of New Zealand, and Steve Witt, Professor at the University of Illinois and IFLA Journal Editor. If you'd like to join me on stage, and perhaps we can give them a little bit of applause for encouragement. Right, thank you. I'm going to be a little brutal. Is the microphone on? I hope so. Yes? I'm going to be a little brutal in the timing here. And I apologize for sending you all these rather sort of militaristic instructions about what we were going to do. But we have around 30 minutes to discuss this extraordinarily rich report. So the exam question that I set the panelists in advance, which was to say which trends they found particularly interesting, surprising, concerning, which ones really resonated with them. We don't have much time, but we will begin. We will have, I hope, some question time at the end. I can encourage you to put your questions or comments in the app. And Stephen, my colleague Stephen Weiber, will be sort of consolidating them, and we'll also take the opportunity as well to get some questions from the floor. But if you prefer to do it online, use the app, which probably uses a little bit of AI somewhere in there. So I would say that, we don't have a huge amount of time, but let's begin. So Steve, I'm going to start with you. And I'd really like to hear your thoughts around Trend 1, the knowledge practices are changing. And whilst AI is really woven into all of these trends, and we've heard a lot about it, and we will hear a lot during the course of a few days, it's probably particularly relevant, I think, for Trend 1. So what are the challenges of tackling misinformation, the deep fakes, information integrity? And as you're the first speaker, I'm going to double your exam question, which is, I'm going to ask you to cover Trend 2 as well as Trend 1, but I'm not going to give you any extra time. So Trend 2, which is AI and other technologies are transforming society, and use your own personal generative AI to come up with that response. Over to you then, Steve.
Thank you. I'll use a lot less energy in my answer, for sure. I think when I look at Trend 1 and Trend 2, my first thought is to look at trends, other trends around the globe. And when we look at trends we see in terms of deglobalization or reglobalization, as it's being called, the COVID pandemic taught us that when we're challenged with a global problem or issue, we didn't seek global solutions to that. We kind of looked inward, and we took more nationalistic views. Populism grew. We took more local solutions. And it really challenged our ideas of globalization and systems of global governance. And when I look at changes in how knowledge production is changing and how AI is challenging us, I really wonder how this repositioning of the global is going to impact that. We see in many nations responding to knowledge production their own national policies that encourage a certain type of publication. So you must publish and get rewarded for publishing in top-ranked journals, for example. At the same time, trends towards local repositories of knowledge and information. We see different issues of sovereignty, the nation state reasserting itself over its information infrastructure and even what can be communicated, going down to local levels. Yet at the same time, we have a blossoming of sovereignty rights being asserted by indigenous peoples, and that knowledge being used in local ways to attack the climate crisis. So as we move into AI, one has to wonder, at what point are these systems going to become further atomized at local, national levels, and to what extent will they communicate each other, or is it going to just be a competition for different types of AIs to be used for that national context without the kind of dialogue that we might need at a global level?
Thank you. So, Rachel, I'm going to turn to you, and you've just heard Steve sort of brilliantly combine sort of trend 1 and 2 and bring in a huge range of issues, and particularly coming from New Zealand, some of these thoughts around how Indigenous communities are reflected there. So how does these two trends, and particularly around perhaps the knowledge practices, the opportunities for improving sort of equity in knowledge systems, how does that sort of resonate and feel for you in your context?
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. The first thing that I wanted to acknowledge was how useful the trend report is. I think the opportunity for us to have discussions globally about these trends is really important. And also acknowledging the comments made at the beginning about how interconnected they are, because I think it is really hard to look at them separately. One of the trends from the previous report that particularly struck me was about strategic thinking and the ability to be thinking about solutions for the long term when we are often responding to crises and things that come up day after day. And so I am thinking about this in terms of how do we respond strategically. We do have real opportunities, and we do have some risks and challenges, and particularly, as was mentioned, around our Indigenous communities. And I think one of the important things is holding really steadfast to the nothing about us without us. We know that as libraries, we hold really significant information created by those communities, and there is trust in us as institutions to ensure that we're protecting that information, working with the communities that was created by, to ensure that tools like AI, if we're going to use that information, that it is used in a way that brings those communities with us. So I think in terms of the AI, and this was something that I heard recently at a symposium I was fortunate to be at in Ottawa, thank you Leslie, wherever you are, and it was about know where your line is, the line about the acceptable use of AI. We can say, yes, it's great for things like spell checking, and there's a whole lot of good uses of AI, but facial recognition for profiling, no. I would say that's not a good use of AI. So in your organisations, and as you're working through this, know where your line is, have those discussions, make sure you've got those frameworks.
Thank you very much. And I think a couple of things that I found that really struck me. Nothing about us without us, however you said it, which I think is, and we will come on later thinking about that sort of equitable, that digital divide, and those equitable futures and how we create them. And that idea of the line. And it's fascinating because what I love about the trend report is not just the report, but the imagined futures, the scenarios, which I know we will be asking all of you to really think about those and comment on afterwards, because they are quite amazing, but how we use them. So kind of moving on to that, because all of this requires skills, learning, the ability, things are becoming incredibly complex, the risk of exacerbating that divide. And I'd like to really move on to Hayford to speak about this. Somewhere like Ghana, an incredible country, so dynamic, really exciting place. You can see the huge potential there in Ghana and in much of West Africa. How do you see this particular trend and the potential opportunities for somewhere like Ghana?
Yes, I think, thank you very much. I think the need for a certain type of skill to be able to fill existing gaps have been in existence for quite some time. And that is why I think most academicians have started designing course models to be able to enhance the capacity of existing trainees in our universities and colleges. In Ghana, for example, we recognize that a lot of our citizens are in need of a certain type of information that needs to be produced, both at the library and even by existing educational institution. But the capacity for our people to be able to undertake certain tasks that can be able to produce the needed result for consumption by our citizens have always been a challenge. And that is why for institutions like ours, one of the key things we've tried to be able to do is what we call the continuous professional development of our personnel, so that they can be able to have the opportunity to leverage on existing training programs that are amplifying some of these new trends and be able to help them to be able to build the capacity to be able to serve our citizens. And I believe it's been an area that has been quite worked out by a lot of library associations. I've seen the American Library Association, for example, designing a lot of new courses that can be able to help people working within the information space to build the needed capacity. Now, if you look at the trend, it talks more about citizens' skills gap instead of institutions like ours, the gaps that exist even within us that are supposed to be managing this information. And so I believe that it is an area we need to look at as we try to serve the citizens. What existing programs, policies, interventions, continuous professional development that we are putting in place for our existence are. Because once their skill sets are built up, then they can be able to properly respond to the needs of the communities.
Fantastic. So building up the skills amongst your librarians and the libraries to really genuinely serve those communities and build up the skills. So Claudia, how does that skills challenge feel coming from Germany, dynamic, industrial, advanced, the EU, which has policies, endless policies for this? What does it feel like on the ground?
On the ground, I can tell you that there is a lot of fear. And I think we share it with a lot of people in the world that AI is taken over. And I was very confident here now from the first talk we had today and also from your trend report that I think there's nothing to fear about. We really have to handle it. We just have to make sure, as we did it before when the first computers came up, that the librarians are able to work with it. And as you just explained, and I think that was a very good explanation, that we really have to know what to do and what not to do. And there is this ethical aspect we librarians have. And this is a difference to other people, I think, in the world, also to politicians, that we can, do something for the people, what other people cannot do. And I think we really can make the difference in this. And it's very important, like for our students, that they cover all this technology, that they know a lot. But as you know, they don't have to code anymore. Now AI is taking over the coding. So what they have to learn is how to deal with it, how to rule the minions we have learned. That's what we have to learn.
Fantastic. No, and I think deserves an applause. And I think that ethical framework, that trust that librarians and information professionals have, which is, I think, a particularly challenging one for, if you like, librarians and information specialists who actually work for government, because, in fact, they are the ones that many governments and ministers turn to because of that ethical framework. So I think it's really powerful, which I think brings me to my next question, which is to Rachel, around that area of trust, which is that trend 3, trust being renegotiated, especially in government and media. And you as a a national librarian, a government representative, if you like, an institutional representative. How does that feel for you, this idea of trust? How do you build that trust in the public institutions?
I think libraries are in the fortunate position of often being institutions that already have a high level of trust. I think that where we've got some opportunity and some work to do is building the muscle and the response for responding to mis and disinformation. I know that there was some reports done in the EU after the Brexit vote in the UK, and one of the things that came out of that was when there was misinformation, there wasn't an immediate response to it. And so from that and from that learning, there is resource and people who are able to respond. And so I think in libraries, that's something that our professional associations and IFLA would be able to help us with, to actually build that muscle and to be able to respond when there is mis and disinformation. Because I think once it's out there and you're on the back foot responding, it is so much harder. But if you're being more proactive and you're looking out for as soon as this starts, that you've got your messages, you've got your channels, you know you've got your advocates and your champions, and you know how to respond, then you're going to get a much better response. But it's not an easy situation that we're in, and it is something we're working together. I think we can get a better result and a better outcome.
So,
And Sharon,
yeah.
just to add to what she mentioned, I think in the report there was the discussion around the fact that now a lot of communities are becoming desert areas, that information are not being generated by the traditional media. What is happening on the continent of Africa, however, is that citizen journalism, or citizens taking up ownership of information production, has become the trend. And so when there are typical environmental issues, like when you come to Ghana, illegal mining has become a very topical issue, destroying the environment. Citizens are in remote areas, otherwise would not have been visited by traditional media. But citizens themselves are amplifying and using current technologies to be able to broadcast. People do live TikTok videos and are amplifying local issues. And I think it's an area that we have to give credit to global citizens for really using technology to be able to create a voice of their own.
No, and I think that's an absolutely fascinating thing, and what you're saying about challenging perhaps the big issues like the environment. And I think that's an area where there is so much challenge, and we're so reliant on that citizen journalism, if you like, and on protesters. And I think, I might actually just sneak another trend in here, because I know that as well, Rachel, that you have a particular interest in that trend 6 about the information systems using more and more resources. We always have this view of sort of New Zealand as this stunningly beautiful country, therefore it must have the best environmental policy in the world. And, great branding, great marketing. But I think that whole area of thinking around that sort of, the e-waste and the natural resources, and it sort of made me think about it when you, Hayford, were talking about how citizen journalism kind of highlighted the illegal mining and the damage to the environment, because that environmental area is such an important area where the message can be shared. And I'd maybe just a couple of quick words on that and thoughts on that.
Well, New Zealand is somewhere at the moment where a lot of the big companies like Microsoft and Amazon are quite keen to come and build data centres there, because the renewable energy, because the wind and geothermal, etc. And there is the other side of that, which is saying, well, just because you've got that renewable energy, should you be using it to that extent? And I know that some other countries like Ireland, the use of the power by data centres is now quite significant and putting strain on the national grid. But I think for us as institutions that hold significant collections, we should be thinking really hard about the growth of those collections and being more and more discerning. I think, you know, also we have that tension with wanting to digitise more material to make it more accessible, but we know that that comes with a footprint as well. So just because we can digitise something, should we? What is the outcome we're looking for? Does it actually improve accessibility? You know, there's a whole lot of things for us to think about in that space.
No, I think that's really, really fascinating. And I think it's something that we don't often think about, and we always assume that somehow E and digital is sort of carbon neutral and risk-free. So Steve, I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to kind of bring us a little back to that whole idea of trust being renegotiated. And, you know, particularly given your comments earlier about knowledge practices and AI, I guess, what's your angle, if you like, on that, on trust and the things we've heard from both Rachel and Hayford around that?
Well, I think, you know, what we've experienced in the last, you know, a little over a decade is a great erosion of trust of authority, which is part of what's driving misinformation. People would rather get information from a local source. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's nefarious. So I think we're dealing with this lack of trust in scientific authority and the authority of the media, that, you know, libraries are sitting in between that as a traditional mediator of that kind of official knowledge. So I think that's going to be a significant challenge, is how does the library maintain its value to a community, its sense of neutrality and trustworthiness in a domain that's increasingly contested by the media, by local, and by politics. And, you know, where's the balance in navigating that so we don't erode our trust, but at the same time maintain our ability to mediate knowledge in ways that improve our communities, improve people's ability to make decisions.
Thank you. And talking about improving communities takes me to Trend 7. And I'm going to ask Claudia to think about that one, which is the Trend 7, people seeking community connections, spaces to share, a key. And as a former IFLA president as well, I think you'll have a particularly interesting perspective on this.
Yes, first of all, because we have this third place, I think, development all over the world that all the libraries, they have now special spaces, and they offer the spaces to the community. But what I thought was coming out of the trend was there are a lot of spaces outside of us, outside of the library, and there are these digital spaces where we are not represented, but maybe our community is represented. So what can we do that our community represented in these spaces talk about libraries, talk about us, inform people what we are, and that we can also inform them over using this community to show what the library can, in the question of trust, but all in many other things, support the community in it. And I think that is something where we really have to work on. It's not just there because we have a space and we have a community. That's not all. We really have to learn how to make it in the digital space a very successful way of development for our libraries.
Thank you. So space doesn't necessarily make a community. This is where the human intervenes. And Hayford, how does that resonate with you, and how does that feel, that sort of perspective?
I think libraries, since the inception of library services, have always been a community, creating spaces, creating safe havens for different group of people. In our part of the world, the most challenge that we face as a country is unemployment of our youth. And so leveraging on library spaces to be able to create avenues of opportunity for young people to be able to meet and link them with opportunities has been one of the critical areas we've been focusing on, for example. And so there is a gap between, getting people connected to relevant knowledge that can help them to be relevant to the job market. And so we use our spaces to be able to create opportunities like that. So for example, we have a program we've rolled out with the Commonwealth of Learning that we are able to recruit a lot of young people that are looking for opportunities so that we can be able to enroll them on some of the high impact or new opportunities, job growth areas that have been developed by Google Grow. So we bring them on to these massive open online course platforms. We've created WhatsApp groups to be able to manage this group of people that are really looking for a significant connection to a certain information. And so we bring them together to be able to link them up with opportunities. So we've done, since 2020, we've done about 50,000, for young people in Ghana. Now the next stage is, okay, now they've gotten the training, linking them up, linking them to job opportunities. That is when also libraries then begin to create this, public-public and public-private partnerships to be able to see how do we, the people that come for services from us, how do we link them up? So we work with, for example, the Youth Employment Agency in Ghana that is able to curate job opportunities so that when there are opportunities and they share it with us, we also share with these young people that they are able to apply for and are able to get opportunities. And so the role we're trying to play is not only for people to just have a place to talk to people, but also to be able to link them up to opportunities that they are looking out for.
Fantastic. So one of the themes that has come from much of what everybody has said, and you've just talked about this creating, in a sense, equitable futures for your young people, and the efforts that and the role that libraries are playing there, which is incredible. Because the one trend we've not directly discussed yet is trend 5 around the digital divide that I know, Kim, you feel very passionate about as well, about this unequal sort of distribution of digital technology and ability. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you each, 4 panelists, before I come to Michael and Kim, a very quick sort of 1 minute to just your thoughts about the digital divide. And Rachel, I'm going to start with you.
The digital divide is something that we're very conscious of and have been actively working on in Aotearoa. The National Library's been really fortunate that we have a program which is working with public libraries across Aotearoa to provide free internet. And during COVID, that was recognised as a really important service and has been invested in. But there is a challenge to make it sustainable and cover the whole country. But the other thing that we are seeing is that sort of unfunded mandate where as central government is putting more of its services online and people who don't have the skills are going to libraries to get help to access some of those. That's putting a real strain on our public libraries and they are not being funded for that. So that's a challenge that we're currently grappling with. And I see it both as an opportunity and a challenge. Yeah. We're really conscious of it, and it was great to hear it highlighted in the trend report, because again, the value of that report is for us to be able to work with our colleagues and say, this is a global trend, and we're seeing it play out in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
So Steve, how do you think we ensure that this advance in technology doesn't exacerbate that digital divide?
I guess if I narrow down, an aspect of digital divide maybe, and that's in terms of a scholar's ability to access knowledge to do their work. but then inversely, their ability to access the right to publish their research and to contribute to those conversations. And I think it's one of the areas where I do see some hope in the use of AI technologies in terms of helping to level the playing field for scholars who have access to a quality AI environment to increase the efficiency of their work. Scholars that don't have access to research assistants, as many well-financed research institutions have for their faculty, can use an AI in that sense, or to reformat their citations or generate a kind of outline that they can follow that follows a standard academic expectation. And I think that can really help in gaining access to these conversations that we're having, in that more academic sphere.
Claudia.
Yes, I think the academic sphere, I just have been in Samoa, and at the university, at National University there, it takes more time to download material. And that I have seen in a lot of countries, that the time you need for download is really not effective, but it affects the learning of the students. And so there is a lot to do still on it. Even that we have, or we know that I think there are more smartphones now than the world population. But everybody with a smartphone is not yet maybe has access to the information they want. And if the trusted sources are no longer trusted, so where will they go and what will they know? And how will be their political knowledge about their own competences, about their own possibilities? So I think there is a lot to do to work, especially to close this gap, the digital gap, and make sure that more people have really good access to all the information we have. I still think that also government information, I talk about that later, is a part where we really have to work on. So just to make sure that the digital gap we have, we librarians, we always try to work for it, but there is a lot more. There are politicians, there are technologies, we have to influence them. It's not working if we don't influence, if we don't advocate there. I think that is really important.
I think that's a really important point, the advocacy. Hayford, I'm going to give the last comment on this to you.
Yes. I think addressing the issue of digital divide has to be addressed from different angles. There's a public-private partnership, public-public partnership, and just as Claudia mentioned about the need for kind of collaboration. In Ghana, for example, the Library Authority needed to be able to expand access to technology. And what we did was to be able to work with another government agency whose mandate is to be able to make technology accessible for the citizens. And so through what we call the Ghana Investment Fund for Electronic Communication, we're able to deploy computers at our various libraries for people to have access to them when they come into those spaces. And so that's kind of addressing the physical access to the technological devices. But then there is also the access to the online platforms, the internet and all of that, to be able to access the content that we have. So we develop a digital library app, and you of course have to download the app. You need to consume content on it using data. Now you are dealing with a population that are quite poor. And so how do they come to your library platform, accessing information and making them poorer by taking their little resources from them? So we work with the telecom companies. So we work with MTN and Telecel, used to be Vodafone, Seven. They've zero-rated our platform, which means that now access to the resources we have does not come at cost to the citizens. And so I think that's also one of the areas that as a library institution, we should be able to explore to see how do we make sure that access information does not become a cost burden on our citizens. And I think that's one area we are trying to use to be able to make sure that we get a lot more people consuming our content. But there's also the broader national programs that are, government digital literacy interventions that are being rolled out to be able to make sure that school children have access to devices, teachers have access to devices. These are interventions that I believe that as information professionals, we may want to get ourselves involved and maybe advocate for proper distribution and access to these resources.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Really good. So I'm going to hand over to Kim and Michael to give their sort of response to views from 4 continents. And I think it's been a really interesting perspective to hear the very different contexts and approaches, but with common concerns and actually a common optimism, I think, which is great. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to respond. Over to you both.
Yes, thank you so much. And look, I guess I wanted to start by saying that, what we had set out to do, I think, is to create a document that is generative, that creates discussion, that, really invites conversation. We certainly didn't want to create a trends report that was definitive, saying this is the way it is, right? So the fact that we're having such a rich conversation on the panel here is incredibly satisfying, and it's kind of proof of concept, I suppose, that this is already working. And I guess the other point to make is that, and what again has been passionately talked about by all the panelists, is to point to solutions. Actually, it can actually, one of the things Kim and I talked about a lot as we were developing the report is that it can all we could focus on a lot of negativity, right? Like each of the trends definitely has a very negative kind of implication, but we wanted to definitely point to solutions in the trends report as well, and in the additional documentation. So to see the focus on solutions is incredibly satisfying, and I think we saw that from all 4 panelists. I really loved Rachel's point that you have to know where your line is, right? I think in the busyness of life, in the busyness of our workplaces, we often just don't get the opportunity to stand back and think about, well, where do we stand on this? But actually, libraries as a core part of the community are in a really wonderful position to say, this is our line, this is what we believe, these are our ethics, and that's why we're making these decisions moving forward.
Great, thank you. Librarians always come up with brilliant solutions. That's one of the things that I have learned. Kim?
Look, I think that, as Michael said, when we were developing the report, we had lots of discussions. One of those was, how these trends overlap and interact with each other. And I really liked Hayford's example of, bringing young people into the libraries, because I think one of the things that we've found in the research that we have done with libraries and in doing the trend report is this, these problems and these trends and these futures that we're talking about are not going to be solved by libraries alone. This is about libraries being part of communities and making partnerships and working with others to address these problems, and that involves, working with government and working with other organisations. One of the things that we know why the divide is deepening is because that there's an assumption that if you do have a mobile phone, more than people, that you're somehow connected. But at the moment, if you have a mobile phone, it's you're more likely to have less skills than if you had a mobile phone and a laptop. So actually, providing the right kind of access to technologies and the right kind of skills to be able to use them in these partnership models in libraries, I think is going to be a really, exciting potential future as well. And it's just important that we're, no one's left behind, and we're bringing everybody with us as we're using all of these new kind of technologies and are invested in these new futures.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. I think it was a great panel. We are going to have, I hope, we've got a couple of questions, and I'm going to ask Stephen, who has been, I think, I hope editing them, consolidating them, controlling the information, no, I'm sure perfectly well, to see if there's some questions that we can put to the panel. But just before you do that, I think one of the things I would just emphasize, and I didn't pay Kim to say this, but that importance that you've put, that's been reflected in all comments, of something that both Vicky and I were highlighting, this importance of partnerships and working with the community. And actually the role that libraries can play, the critical role libraries can play in ensuring that these trends are a force for good rather than scary. And I think that came out clearly. So Stephen, some of the questions for the panel.
Yes, indeed. So this is your censor speaking.
Right.
So I'm grouping questions, but just say thank you everyone who has been asking questions. There's some really good thought-provoking things that I think we'll try and bring out as a set of further homework for everyone. But I think grouping them into 4 types of questions. I think there was a lot of interest in the question of skills, and I think our top-ranked question focused on to what extent does libraries' experience around teaching media and information literacy lead us towards being able to build AI literacy. But I think linked to that, how do we make sure that librarians themselves have the skills to be able to impart skills? Because I don't know, you can't just assume that click your fingers and there's that. So I think that first question of what's the first step in that process? I think a second question focuses around, have we reached a high water mark of open? I don't know, have we got to the stage where there's the optimism about putting more out there, giving more freedom to do things? Have we actually got to, as I said, a high watermark there, or is there a chance to actually do things again, do things better? A third group I'm going to class as, what neutrality do we need now? And this comes from the perspective that firstly, the old idea, the neutrality on which librarians prided themselves has come into question because we've seen that it was subjective and it did have consequences. But we also see that neutrality itself isn't neutral, that there are plenty of people who are pushing back on this idea that access to all sorts of information isn't a desirable thing, especially in more authoritarian regimes. And then there's a final point about how can we make sure that librarians are accessing the conversation. And so the advocacy word was used, but how do we actually make sure that librarians are part of that conversation? So that's a clumsy grouping of the excellent questions we've received.
Okay, so we've got questions around skills, first steps. Have we reached the high mark of openness and access? Neutrality. And the fourth one was, how do we get into the conversation? Advocacy, so talking out. So I haven't got time to give everybody the chance to respond to all of those, but who would like to take that skills one? Hayford, yes. Hand was up first.
So what we need to really do is to be able to revolutionize the whole management of libraries across the world. For example, when I was appointed to the Ghana Library Authority and I did a skill gap analysis, I recognized that I needed to change the whole scheme of service that exists in the organization. So a scheme of service is the document that try to dictate the career growth path of different professional groupings within the organization. Yes, there will be existing staff who are not ready to learn new technology. And so why can't we create a new career pathway, so that we can bring other competencies to work with our professionals within the library spaces. And so we create a new technology and innovation career growth path that have brought in developers, AI people, and they are supporting our internal technology development. And I think that that's one of the ways that we need to be able to look at it, instead of maybe forcing existing staff to learn things they are not ready to learn. Bring in new people, create new career growth path areas for those people. And I think you could be able to address the way the institution is ready to respond to the needs of the communities.
Mm-hmm. That's brilliant. Fantastic. High point of open access. Who would like to take that one? I look at. Ooh, have we reached that high point? I think we're all beginning to look towards you, Steve.
I guess we're in a river city, so a high point is not necessarily a good thing. But I'd say there's just a lot more we have to do in terms of open access, and libraries have been partly to blame in the problems we're experiencing in our ability to accept license after license for access to materials that we need, but not able to negotiate actually purchasing digital content, but keep re-upping our licenses. So until that paradigm shifts, I'm not sure how much further we can go, because we're basically just taking the funds that might be going into a private organization that has the scale to deliver these materials and diverting them towards purchasing open access agreements or things, on kind of a bit-by-bit basis for authors. But we haven't reduced the amount of resources and funding that's required, and we haven't changed this model of licensing versus ownership of this knowledge. And I think we need to be able to own it, use it just like we use books, replicate it, share it. And until we get to that point, we're going to be hitting the ceiling in terms of access.
Right. Maybe that won't cheer up the questioners. Neutrality. Claudia, was that you that would like to? Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I think we have a big discussion about neutrality, and we have two aspects. I think one aspect is that as long as we tell people that we are neutral and we are open for all, that was always a key of our work and as librarians. On the other side, we saw that neutrality also might take out some people from this. And if we are too neutral, then we have no point of view, really. And we have a point of view. We have not only what I talked already about, the way we are doing things, our ethical aspects. We also, I think, we have a very strong base on the UN human rights. And if you have a strong base on the human rights, and I don't know, hundreds of countries, all the countries that have signed it, based on these human rights, you have a very good base what is not neutrality. So where you have to fight for, where you have to go for, what is the right thing to do? And that is, I think, our base. And when you talk about this and you take it for real, and you also know that in these human rights articles, the last article extremely openly says who is against these rights has to be, we have to fight against those people who are against these rights, then you know exactly where your point is, and then you are not neutral.
Yeah, no, I think that's a powerful definition, which leaves you, Rachel, with advocacy.
Advocacy is good for you
I
too.
just also want to say that I think that point about fighting for what's right, the fact that we're here in Brisbane and not in Dubai speaks volumes in terms of IFLA and our stance. So advocacy, I think Claudia's already made the point that one of the things we need to do is not talk to ourselves, to recognise that it requires more than librarians to solve some of these big issues. I think the other thing is that we have to really recognise that it's political what we're doing, and it is tricky to navigate and negotiate, but forming those powerful alliances and collaborations with people with wanting similar outcomes, wanting things to improve for communities and putting people at the centre of what we do, I think is one way that we need to further the aims and improve things for humanity. We are that powerful if we're working together and working with others. So, yeah.
And that is a great way to finish. So thank you very much indeed. Stronger together. So I want to just thank everybody, thank the panel, obviously thank Michael and Kim for their tremendous work, for you for listening, for all of the questions. And I also, just to say that we will be publishing the trend report today. You will be able to access it via QR code. I've got some cards and it might even appear on the screen if we're lucky, or on the app, but you will be able to access it. It's a great report. It's got all the scenarios in it as well. It is still work in progress, and there will be more work done up. We've got a workshop later this week to perhaps work a little bit more on them. But I think it is that idea about generative. It's not predictive, and it's about imagining the future. And it's a future in which we all have agency, and we can work together, and librarians and libraries are incredibly powerful in this space. Use that power to build a better future. So the report comes out, and I just want to thank everybody, and I'd like to thank as well Siaw, who funded this. And Siaw, of those of you who don't know it, is the foundation that was set up by IFLA to administer a very significant grant that was given to IFLA by the Gates Foundation. And so we are grateful ultimately to the Gates Foundation and to Siaw, who've managed and administered this fund. And that's what's really helped us to do this fantastic trend report. And we are very grateful to them. Thank you very much. And thank you again for our panel. And one more round of applause, I think. Thank you. Thank you.